quick, since we do have a great intimate group here, I'd love to hear who you are and where you're coming from to this panel really quickly. So just name a primary, maybe one primary Boffer Larp you're involved in, how long you've been doing it, and region that you most identify with, or none of this information.
Name's Michael, I'm from Florida, and I've only really ever played Dystopia Rising for about 2 to 4 years, depending on how long you count me having quit.
Hi, I'm Aubriette. I'm generally from around the New England area, technically Rhode Island. Most of the Boffer Larp games I've played are kind of shorter runs, so I'm just going to say I generally play in the accelerant system if people know that.
CW from Los Angeles area, and Boffer Larp game is called Twin Mass for about 4.5 years now.
I'm Emily. I'm from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I'm from upstate New York. I live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I mostly played Doomsday, but I've been LARPing for like 15 years, so I've touched a lot of them. But yeah, mostly Doomsday now.
Hey, I'm Crisco. I'm also from Lancaster. I also play Doomsday.
I'm Masani. I'm from Rochester, New York. I've been playing for about 6 years now, and I play Doomsday primarily. I used to play Yamkar.
I'm Julian from Singapore. I've only ever played one game in Denmark, and I'm just really here to learn.
Awesome. We can maybe sneak back from the back.
Yeah, and we're Casey and Kevin. We're from North Carolina, Southeast, and we run a Boffer Larp that is now in its 21st year called Solar, which is loosely neuroderivative, but way back in the day before there was anything besides neuro. So, that's us.
I'm Keith West. I've been playing the Legends Legacy LARP for a few years, but I also run a summer camp that's an educational LARP summer camp for kids that's starting this year.
I'm Thomas. I'm from the Boston area, and I've only played in a few sort of one-off Boffers, but I'm very interested in the process of building communities, particularly around LARP and with issues of bringing in new people and power dynamics in that. So I'm very much here to learn from these long-running communities.
I'm Eric. I've been playing in, I'm from around here. I've been playing in LARP, but pretty much exclusively in the realms, both playing and running, for about 10 years now.
I'm Jacob. I'm also from this area. I've bounced around various LARP communities in the past 10, 12 years, somewhere in there.
Cool. And for our new joiner,
Hi.
Name.
Hi, my name's Albert Overland. I've been part of the 7 LARP community for about 10 years, in the Intercon LARP community for about 6, 7 years.
Cool. I love hearing about where everybody's coming from and what kinds of systems you guys are familiar with. So I'm just going to briefly introduce our panel and then pitch an opening question that's very broad, and we'll see where the conversation takes us. I'm really excited to facilitate this panel on building better Boffer Larp communities. So we have, to my right, we have Jeramy, who's one of the owners of Edge Forever and the director of Doomsday, a Boffer campaign LARP that has been running for exactly 6 years as of Living Games. He also runs a blog that he updates very infrequently on various LARP topics. And so that's Jeramy, everyone. To Jeramy. We also have Kris Kitts, who works with Edge of Forever as one of the general managers for their flagship campaign LARP Doomsday, and has previously staffed other longer running Boffer games as a community customer service rep and liaison, a very important role, and has consulted with other chapters within that system to help them establish their own guidelines for creating and maintaining safer spaces within the greater live action role-playing community. So thank you, Kris, for joining us. And then finally, we have, you prefer Hayley, right? Or Hayley Cat?
Hayley.
Okay, so Hayley is actually just starting a PhD in cultural studies at Davis this fall. Congratulations, Hayley. LARP is one of the things that she'll be looking at during this PhD program. She became involved with Boffer Larp in 2003, ultimately staffed a couple of games, including a few years with the Oregon chapter of Alliance back when it was called Nero. So yeah, welcome to our panel. I'm going to start opening up with a question that because since I have all the power as the moderator, I can ask the questions that excite me. So a question that I posed at the beginning of this morning about what is LARP health, what makes a strong or healthy LARP community, what are the signifiers of that in your experience?
Go for it.
Oh God. I think from a business end, transparency, letting your players know what they can expect, in terms of content, in terms of your safety mechanics, in terms of who they can speak to when something isn't going right, and letting them know that not only are your staff there to make the game go, but the asterisk on that is that either all or some of your staff, depending on your structure, are there to make sure that they're getting a safe and enjoyable experience out of what can sometimes be very challenging content. And letting them know that they're not alone in those challenges that they face. So that's kind of my approach.
I guess my answer on that is that you need to treat the community like a community. If you're going to treat it, if you're trying to create that better space, then the biggest kind of thing is that you need to it's sort of it's an organism made up of many cells, and you need to make sure that the health of all those cells is sort of in place, and a lot of that has to do with sort of just being decent. That really is one of those core things that I think that people kind of forget sometimes, is that just don't be an asshole. And then there are some times where you need to be. There are some times where you kind of need to a little bit be the asshole. But those times should be set reserved for very specific occasions. But yeah, I mean, I think if you've been playing for a long period of time, if you've been playing Boffer games for a long period of time, you probably have experienced that where it's just why are you being terrible right now? And just not doing that means a lot.
Choosing not to do that.
Yes, choosing not to do that.
So I guess, weird question. Has anyone here seen the documentary Monster Camp?
God, yes. Are you static? Do you have
So
treasure?
I left that chapter the month before that was filmed, actually. That was, right before I moved abroad. And one thing that I find very funny about that documentary is that they almost made a documentary about the Seattle Lions chapter and kind of missed the spot, And I do think that many of the things that we were doing that were really exciting and unique there, folks were just too busy running game and just literally told the camera people to go. So folks who had a lot of time on their hands got to play with them, which was great, and they captured some things. But it was one of the mechanics that I thought was really exciting for building better community that myself and a few other folks were part of in organizing. And it sucks because I can't really use Monster Camp without the term being a trope now, because we called it Monster Camp in that LARP, where it was we had a designated space on the Boffer, grounds that we were using, where folks would come when they were going to NPC, and we'd work to build emotional calibration among NPCs, because there's a big problem, I'd say, or there was. I'm not sure where we are now, because this was a good decade ago that I was really working on that, where you'd have folks who come in to a campaign Boffer Larp, and they come in as NPCs because they've been told, you can't PC until you memorize all the rules, and you NPC, and you mess it up because you're brand new and you have a 250-page rule book to memorize. And so the NPCs are getting yelled at by the PCs a lot and a rules lawyer during their first game. And then they start really hating the PCs. And so you get a culture of these NPC folks who come in and they're just yeah, I get to go beat up a bunch of theater people, and that was an issue when I first started playing myself, and we called ourselves the B-Ham Nero Chicks. We had T-shirts for ourselves. It was myself, a woman named Carmen, and a woman named Anna, and we were really working with NPCs to sort of do emotional labor with them, where it's all right, cool, you're new to Monster Camp, you're going to spend a good 4 hours with us talking about how we are here to create a player experience, and we're here to entertain the players, and we're going to send you out to some townies first, and we're gonna, you know, pull you into like the theatrical aspect of the community. So I guess building good Boffer communities, I feel like there are rituals and rules, mechanics too sometimes that help like mitigate some of the stuff that you don't realize it's going to arise. You know, when you write these games, it's once it's in action that you realize, oh gosh, no one really thought of that, and now
we have this antagonism running rampant.
Yeah.
That we never wanted in the first place.
But being able to be adaptable to those changes when you realize they need to happen, because like, you know, when I first started, like Doomsday got built, like we were working on it for like a few years before it came out, and like, you know, it's been running for 6 years, and there's been a large cultural shift that's happened in that period of time, and there's certain things where like there was a time where there's what we call them traumas now, and they're very different than they were before, but we had, like, we called them insanities before, because it was a common thing in like Boffer gaming, where you can get like, you can become, like, you can get insanities in a game. And when we literally had like depression as one of those, and like a player came to play, and like it was something that I
not a move, but people actually being carted out by ambulance. Yep.
We had someone that had like their first, I think it was like their first or second event, like the person's girlfriend, now wife, like came to us and was like, hey, like this person just rolled for this insanity and they have like depression, and they were like, can we do something about that? And I was like, oh yeah, we're gonna, like I was like, it just like, it was like one of those things, like immediately opened my eyes, like, yes, obviously, like I'm not going to force someone to role play something that they can't like do, and but like, and then I was like, it went, like depression went away as a thing, just because like I literally, like my sister is a psychologist and like wrote up our insanities in like a very like psychological, like wrote them up like, so we had like very like, you know, it's like here's exactly how it's written up, but yeah, no, but it's like it wasn't fun, like it's not fun to play, it's not interesting really to play, and it doesn't really encourage role plays, so, and it was like literally going to hurt someone's like enjoyment of the game, so I was like, yeah, no, we'll re-roll like whatever we can do to resolve this, we can. But that's, I think, like coming, like if you've been playing for a while, you kind of, you know, the person that came to me came with this like trepid sort of like, wasn't entirely certain that like what my response was going to be to this. Because I think we've all sort of had that experience, if you've been playing for a long time, where it was like, the answer is no. You rolled what you rolled, you got what you got, here's what you are. And I was like, that's not how things should run. That's like, you need to be responsive to the people and what they want. And like, I mean, it goes back to just like, be a decent person.
Compassion is so important. And I feel like sometimes it can get lost because we get stressed, or because, you know, it's hour 24 of a 48-hour weekend, and you're like, well, I looked at sleep. And so like, compassion is one of those things that it's so basic, but if someone comes to you and says like, this mechanic hurts me, it's really not hard to find a way to work around it. Or to, after this event, look at the mechanics you've got in place and go like, okay, so maybe the Cotard delusion is fun, but like maybe no one wants to roleplay crippling like existential depression. Like that's, and maybe someone does, but like that should be their choice. It shouldn't be a card that they draw that's like, and now you hate everything. Like, compassion makes it so much easier to make those calls if you can just like remember to exercise it, which again, we're people and sometimes it's hard, but it's a choice, and we should always try to make that choice, because that will make our customers happier, and it will make the people who are our customers feel better about being there and wanting to come back.
So I'm hearing a lot of things that are agreements between each of you about the importance of transparency and trying to fight barriers to entry into the community regarding people as humans, even if they're playing NPCs. Having the twin sides of not being don't be a dick, but also have compassion, even though you might be exhausted, overdrawn on your resources and things like that. So to back up a little bit, and you did a little bit of this reflecting already, especially Jeramy, and talking about your experience, and Hayley, and talking about your experience with the Monster Camp. What was maybe a role that you've taken on to help to promote more healthy LARP communities, like as player liaison or in game design, that you can kind of talk about that experience, as well as how did you get there? What were the signs that caused you to get involved in that role or to shape it in the way that you did? What were some of your experiences with that?
I mean, I think the first thing I did is I hired her. No, there was other parts too, but like that was big. Like, I think that it's weird because like I come from a very, very different world where like I've joked about it before, but like there are things like in games that I played in the past, there are things that like I did at those games that I would like kick myself out of my own game for, and like weren't that terrible by the standards of the day, but like have changed a lot. And like I think that the like, because like we didn't build our game with these tools in place, because those tools just really kind of like were beginning to exist when we created. Like we built the game with the idea that like, hey, there's like certain social things that we maybe want to fix, but like we didn't have the language to kind of like do that. And so a lot of it's been like patching things in the back and making sure that like we are responsible, we are like responsive to like, you know, the standards of decency that we've kind of like come to all kind of like just collectively come to accept, you know, like, you know. And so, I mean, I think a lot of making that change for us was just sort of like, it was slowly bits by bits adding little mechanics, making sure that we had people that were there to like handle, like, you know, we didn't have this at first, but like, you know, a few years in, we had people that were responsible for like people's emotional safety. Like we had people that are marshals and stuff that are responsible for that. But that's not something, again, it's not something we started off with because we just didn't think about it. We were like, well, if something comes up, we'll handle it. But it just wasn't on our radar, like, you know, 6-8 years ago when we kind of started the process. But then it kind of very much became sort of like, yeah, this is something we absolutely need to do for the community, is make sure that there are people and places that they can go to that are people that are equipped to handle that. Because like, you know, like there are people that I'm specifically very good at like helping, but I'm not that person. Like I know my limits and stuff, and I know that I'm not that person. So like, but I'm good at finding people that are like, you know, passionate and like have a fair amount, like, you know, are able to handle that stuff like yourself. And but yeah, it's just basically it's finding the right people and finding the right places and just like being responsive to your player base and being just responsible as a human.
You know, just to piggyback off of some of that, what's, you know, been interesting, having been involved in, you know, campaign Boffer Larp since 2003. I feel like such a, you know, sort of dinosaur clunky robot at this point, where it's like I'll reference things that are just like, oh yeah, we don't do it that way anymore. But it's been interesting seeing the more formal codification of emotional labor roles. You know, because in Alliance Seattle, you know, the game was broken up into houses, and it was PvE, so you know the houses weren't like this. But there were individuals, you know, scattered through the houses where you just knew you could go talk to them and have a conversation and go out of game if you needed to talk about like something that was being brought up. And you know, we had like, you know, a special like part of the campground that sort of informally became that. It was like the shower in the men's room that no one used, you know, where it's like you go and hide, you know, and like have that emotional conversation, you know. And it was funny because like we, when I worked consulting, doing a little consulting with Paul Warwick for the design of Beyond the Ether, which was a game that was sort of a response to some of the things we didn't like about the Alliance rule set that we thought we might be able to fork and do a little better for the sake of our community safety and player base. One of the big things changes we made was to get rid of a non-consensual permanent death system. And this was based on a moment when one of our emotional care characters was permanently killed in a really stupid mod where it was like, why was it written this way? You rifted like 2 people out to a place with giant monsters that were scaled improperly, you know, and you just got really like not very well designed player interactions with that kind of game sometimes, where it was like, this was written 5 months ago and we're just gonna run it with whoever shows up, you know. And you know, Yasme, you know, our person who was part of this, you know, house, you know, a very colorful character who just, you know, really invited people into the space emotionally as players and helped people get into character, but was also someone where at any moment you could just grab her, go out of game and have a talk, and you know, and she was permanently killed. And it was like, she and I were both I'd say some of the main people doing that work. Like I was the tavern keeper, so I was doing all of the stuff for like the police type characters, and she was sort of in the mafia, so she was doing that for, you know, and so sometimes we'd like go out of game and like debrief with each other out of game and be like, okay, how did that work? How did those players, you know, and this was entirely informal though. We didn't have a structure for it. We didn't really understand what we were called or what we were doing. It was just this sense of love and obligation for our friends and family members and, you know, people in the greater community who were playing. And like, that was sort of this culture that began, you know, sprouting up informally at that time. But you also had backlashes among the min-maxers and the people who thought that we were getting too much plot, or maybe the people doing emotional care like that were getting too much, you know, and very fascinating dynamic to have arise. And now you have those roles built in as consultants. And that's been a beautiful and terrifying thing to watch. To say, oh my gosh, this is formally codified, and people are hired to do this, and
people are using that resource of their own volition.
Yeah. Like so I you know, as a cultural studies person, I'm just like, oh my God, like how interesting to see like a literally an occupation go from being an informal thing among these groups to being codified and having a type of labor relation. I guess the document that Brody and I'm trying to remember the other person working on it, you know, they've codified a formal document for this labor role, you know, and it's impressive. But part of me kind of is critical, and I wonder what happens when this becomes monetized. What will it lose its quality?
Can I ask actually about that real quick? Like, what do you mean by like it becoming monetized? Like, how would like what are you referring to specifically?
Well, I guess, you know, some of the conversations I've had with people who have done this informally is that they're like, gosh, are people going to come in and start playing this role just for the cash or just for kudos, you know, and not go the extra crazy full mile that you do when it's your passion, and yet maybe there's a level of personal boundary crossing that you allow to happen when you don't have the financial incentive and labor, you know, stuff going on.
Yeah,
so
that totally happens.
Sorry, that was like a really, but that's been on my mind for like the last couple of weeks as I've been having conversations with the people who are doing this now as a paid, you know, just blowing my mind.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of those circumstances where the people who aren't passionate about it will not. They might do a good job, but if you're not passionate about helping your players and your customers have that safe and freeing experience of knowing you are safe and therefore being able to commit to really challenging choices, or to maybe invest in a plot line that like might cause a little more bleed than normal because maybe it does hit home, but you're going to take it on because you feel safe and empowered not only to try it, but to know you have mechanisms in place to remove yourself if it ends up being too much. If the people who are in those roles aren't passionate about facilitating it, it shows. Like it really, at least from my experience, obviously this is just me based on what I've seen running Doomsday, and I was the customer service liaison for the Alliance Gettysburg chapter, and I consult with the HQ chapter now. The people who don't want to be doing it or who are doing it for the wrong reasons, it shows, because you have to really be willing to have hard conversations with people who might be triggered, or people who are having just a bad customer service experience, and people who, for either one reason or another, maybe it's not intentional, maybe it is, are causing those bad experiences. Like, they're not going to want to have those conversations if they're doing it for the wrong reasons, because those conversations suck. They can be some of the most rewarding conversations you can have as a person involved in running a business, but like, it's really hard to sit down with one of your best friends and be like, did you really just tell someone to drink bleach? Like, that's not cool.
Yes.
Like, are you fucking kidding me right now? Like, those aren't fun, and you won't commit to it if you're not in it, because you're gonna lose friends, but like, the friends you lose are going to be the friends you probably didn't need. So, it's really hard, but it's worth it.
I'd actually like to dig deeper in this topic of the roles of emotional labor that have become more and more codified over time, and just kind of showing my true colors of my own questions that have been racking my mind. I wonder about a lot of the communities seem to have this hybrid of it's a customer service position that's outward facing towards the player base, but whose true motive is to maybe protect staff and plot from please go drink bleach kind of comments and keep it so that their time can be spent on the creative aspect, but versus also trying to serve as an emotional support and a helper for players. So where do you guys fall on the role? Who are you serving, and what are some of the challenges and strengths there?
If I can go first. So about, how long have I been on staff at Doomsday? 3 years?
3 years, some change.
So when I was brought on staff at Doomsday 3 years ago, it was to implement a community manager role. And the intent of the role on paper was that we were supposed to provide the basic mechanisms for folks who were usually like triggered or in a state of emotional or mental health distress, to get them to a place where they could implement their own personal coping mechanisms. On paper, that's what it was. It very much ended up at the outset, and I think this is in part because we didn't communicate the intent of this role as clearly as we needed to, but there were a number of us who got used as mental health professionals, which is not ethical and is not okay for both the person doing the job and the person coming to them, because like, I'm not a mental health professional. I cannot give you the assistance that you medically need. And so that was really challenging for the first couple of months and was a really uncomfortable position to be in because, oh gosh, we didn't communicate this thing clearly and now people have an expectation that is not meeting the intended reality of the goal. So over the past 3 years, we've had to retool the ways we talk about the position and recodify what that position can provide. Part of that was removing the customer service element from it entirely and putting that entirely on me, the GM, and my friend Donna, the other GM of the game, and making it very much like, if it's a customer service thing, like if you're having a bad time, or if player A is like, I stole all of the money in the game and I ran up the hill with it, like don't go to a safety marshal because they are going to ask you if you've had food or water. Come to me. And then the other part of that was recodifying how we talk about it, which is we are here to get you to the place where you can cope. We are here to get you food if you have not eaten recently. If you haven't hydrated recently, we're here to do that. If you are in a place where like you're in the fight or flight, I'm halfway between these two things response position where it's just like 12 years later. We're here to get you to a quiet place or back to your bunk. We're here to talk to you and help you sort of like de-roll or decompress and get you to a spot where you can start doing the like, whatever your coping mechanisms are. And that has been very helpful in just re-explaining what we are here to do and what we cannot do. This always now comes with the caveat of we are not mental health professionals, we're not doctors, but like, it's just sort of separating the church and state of what that role is supposed to be has been very helpful, I feel, in reducing instances where you're confronted with a situation that you are just way not equipped to handle. And it's been, I think, a lot better in the past year or so.
Definitely, like it definitely has. One weird like mechanical thing we kind of discovered is that like actually less is more. You do not want to have a lot of like safety like people that are there to help with like mental health and stuff. Like you don't want, like we had like a large amount of people, and then we just kind of realized that like having too many people. Well, some people just weren't really great at the job.
Yeah, some people were just not doing the job, which goes back to what we were talking about.
Because like they're just, but you really want to kind of focus. You want to focus, and hopefully your community has them. Those people that are incredible at it, because there are people that are really incredible at like helping someone out, and also being good at finding the help that they need. Because the most important thing as a game runner is making sure that the people that are helping people are helped themselves. Like, I will, like, probably about a dozen times any event, like, say to Kris, food, water, deep race, to make sure that she has any one of those three things. And that's just usually my little, like, check-in. But yeah, like, it's important to kind of, like, do that, like, just, like, you know, like, I take care of these people, and these people take care of other people, and you just basically need to make sure that that chain is intact. Because...
From the top down.
Yes.
It really does. If the people who are running the game are setting the example that they want to see, this is the most tried and true thing. Like, it's not revelatory here, but like if it's coming from the top down and like you're setting the example and then I'm setting the example with the other GM and then our staff is setting the example, like it does trickle down and you do start seeing people like the little circle of like 400 people from Rochester who come to our game are now all very good at being like, are you good, are you good, are you good? And that transfers down to the entire player base. It takes time, it's not immediate, but you do see people are increasingly like really careful and conscious of one another and making sure that like, hey, did you eat food recently? No, it's been 8 days, what are you doing? You're dead now.
Yeah, I'm really, so it's like, it just keeps prodding me.
You've died.
Yeah, what kind of incentives have you seen in place for these kinds of roles, even for the folks who are the tertiary folks? What has worked, what has been challenging?
Like you're talking about like actual like incentives as far as like to help.
So is it purely, so for instance, some models are purely volunteer in the role of the player liaison. Other models are you're getting in-game potential benefits or staff credit, or paid, that kind of thing.
Most of it's in-game benefits for us, but honestly, most of the time I think that it's kind of secondary to people that actually want to do the thing. Like we don't really, I don't think we like even people that kind of like that were in that same position that weren't like the people that people went to. You know, like they weren't not doing the job; they were just kind of like over in the corner. But like for the most, they weren't not doing the job from the perspective of they wanted rewards, so therefore they took the job. That's actually a problem we just kind of haven't had. Like because we have a really great community on that end of things, and like when people can't do it, they step back. When people can, they step up, and that's been kind of like our experience. We really haven't had a lot of people that want the job because they're going to get like service points or you know you know some other like small benefits here and there. Like
we're super lucky in that respect.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've run into that.
Well, you know, the communities I've been part of simply haven't codified this role. The last, actually my last experience working with Boffer Larp was Beyond the Ether, you know, it ran from 2012 to 2014, and you know, we didn't have codified roles, but there were definitely people taking on those roles, and a lot of what we were doing for that game in terms of, you know, working to build better communities, was sort of focusing on one of the big issues with Boffer Larps, and I have no idea if this is even a problem in your guys' game. But the problems that happen when you have very high-level players and low-level players, the problems that happen with fluency when some players are very good at the rulebook and some just started playing and don't know the rules, you know, and it was like, there were all of these changes we had to make, or that we decided to make after just years of crummy experience and talking to people who walked away from the game, you know, and I feel like that's so big, and like I'm so glad we're talking about like the emotional care role, because that kind of seems like the number one change that has been really amazing in so many of these games, and part of the game culture that, you know, we were building, that like having people who were contacting those who had walked away from the game, that was sort of part of our informal role. Like, I'm not sure if it's just smart. The counselors that you work with do that, but it's like, okay, someone didn't play, I'm gonna get in touch with you just as a person, not as a game maker, and say, hey, like, what happened? And sometimes we would find out about a broken stair. Sometimes we would find out that there were people doing misconduct and abusive behavior in the community. And, you know, so that was a way to, like, sort of discover that issue. And the great thing about this kind of building, community building, you know, LARP, and, you know, Boffer Larp is right. LARP is just such a new medium, and I feel like we're sort of reinventing the community as we build LARPs, and it's just like, oh, we just ran into this problem. That happens to be a universal problem in culture. This isn't like a LARP thing. This is like literally everywhere, especially in American culture, you know, where it's like, all right, we got to figure out how to deal with this in our community. If we want a healthy community, we're just going to suddenly become more progressive than the rest of the United States right now. Cool.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Okay,
I was just, the thing that you mentioned about like realizing problems that we have societally that are echoed in LARP, the one thing that comes to mind that I'm more in like the past 2 or 3 years I've seen is the issue of touch, and like when I first started playing Alliance almost 10 years ago, Jesus Christ, there was no question of like, I'm gonna start healing you now. And I was like, maybe I don't know you, friend.
I want to be clear, we were friends.
We're friends. But like, there wasn't even a question before it was like, a person I don't know is patting me down to heal me, which like mechanically is how that works, but there was no like, hey, can I touch you? Or like, hey, can I touch your shoulder? It was just assumed that like, well, you read the rulebook, this is how we do this thing. And I was like, who are you? And I feel like in the past couple of years, I've really seen people getting more and more conscious of like, hey, can I touch you? No? Okay, I can just heal you by like wooba-joobing at you. That's totally cool. Like, it's interesting because that is echoed in society where we do see people who don't understand. You should ask a person before you touch them. So it's cool to see that change happening and seeing it like mirrored and echoed and mirror walking. I don't know. My metaphors got lots of those.
The one thing I'll speak, like the one part of what you said before that I would like to kind of like expand upon is like, you know, like I haven't played Alliance. I didn't play like a few games of Alliance, and I went to 2 games. I went to 2 games for Alliance, but like there were certain aspects of it where there were certain when we like one of the things we did do very consciously when we built the rules for the game is to make sure that everyone was playing the same game. Like the entire system was built around the idea that like any like 4 or 5 people with a plan to take down any person in the game at any point was controlled, no matter where they were at, could actually just like, and you know, you're not really, like PvP is a thing that happens, but it is not a thing that like you're necessarily encouraging, but on the same token, you can mechanically kind of build around that, so just, like you don't have like someone in the game that can become like unreasonable, because like, and I came from a game where that was a thing, like I came from a game where like, I went back to retire my character a few years ago as a level 65 character, and I was mid-level for that game. And like when I went to an Alliance game, I realized like looking at like mechanics and stuff that it would take me like years of playing that game to be useful. And like that's just kind of defeating for a player. Like if you can't come in the door and immediately be able to like do stuff, that's a problem. Like that's a problem. Like both that is like also a community problem. Because it just basically makes it seem like, well, there's those people over on that hill over there that will destroy everything if they come into any encounter. But like, you know, especially as one that's getting older, where like I don't have years to invest in and pain to like be involved in that. And that's just like you want to like create mechanics that make people feel awesome, like that you can come in the door and you're immediately like, I'm useful, like I can do these things. I can like do healing, yeah, I can't maybe do healing as good as this person that's been playing for like 3 or 4 years, but like I can still bring this person back up. Like it's not that I'm useless, it's just that like I'm differently like adapted and like it's, so that's kind of a big aspect, and it is like legitimately a community issue, because if a person just kind of feels like, yeah, like there was actually one thing that I did, like we actually had higher like damage caps, and I went to an Alliance game and I was like, yeah, seeing people like swing for 15s is defeating, because like I realized what I would need to do to make that happen, and it was just that was like it was never.
But it's like, all right, the next 7 years,
yeah.
You know, in 7 years, I will be able to swing 10 damages. Like, you know, it's interesting, like the way from that is like showing up and not be useful. I feel like another way for not how writing and speaking about the gender dynamics of Alliance in the early 2000s, you know, was that a very interesting phenomenon that we saw arise was that you have certain players who've been playing for a long time, who were, I'd say 95% of the way, who were just super powered. You wanted to be the strongest player, you know, and you are dependent upon these people for protection. It isn't even a matter of being useful or not. It's a matter of there's literally no space you can walk in character in the game, at least in 2003, 2004 Alliance. That's roleplay only. You know, we got rid of that. We had like a huge central like market space that was roleplay only. So you'd see people like knitting, you know, just doing things where they weren't like clutching their soul. It was sort of the Alliance culture. You know, so you show up for an Alliance game, and immediately it was like, all right, you're a new player, who's your guardian? And by having that dynamic set up, you immediately establish a hierarchy, and in any hierarchy, you have this sort of dialectic where you're working to inform the expectations of whoever your protector or your protected house is. And sometimes those expectations were skewed pretty your gender. There would be levels of masculinity. We saw a lot of those who didn't fit the masculine stereotype, who may have delivered the male at birth, getting gapped like 3 times in a game, including. And and that was something very, very frustrating. There would your player base wasn't showing up that day, and it's like, oh great, there's no one there that's going to, take in someone of that, I don't know, someone who's queer, that was just literally a situation which was very frustrating because so many of our staff members were queer, but not necessarily our player base at that time. So yes, it was a reinforcement of, I'd say, like toxic types of gender roles based on the hierarchy, and that wasn't the ability game. It was just something that was absolutely wrong.
Yeah, especially the changing nature of things. I've seen it. We've had it happen personally. The first game I started off in, I was still kind of exploring. I was exploring gender, but I didn't have any terminology or anything like that. I had the words for it all the time. The words I didn't know anyone. A lot of language that we have now wasn't established. And so when I wanted to do something, I was like, hey, can I play this female role? Because I was interested in exploring that, and it got shut down really hard and in a really negative way. But oddly enough, that was an okay thing for bros to do. It was an okay thing for
humor.
Yes.
It was okay. It was okay for humor. It had to be drag. It had to be ridiculous drag.
Yeah. And that was
no offense to them. But it was at their account.
Yeah. I was actually interested in doing this. I did, it was part of the so. What's going on this?
I'm going to interject real quick that as we have this on, if people can pitch their voices louder, I had some trouble hearing when I was in the session before. Is your question about that, or is it content-based?
It was bouncing off that concept of power pressures.
Yeah, sure.
So I think, as a player, I noticed a lot of community management issues and community safety issues actually started to change after power structures changed in the game. And I noticed that a lot of games, like Alliance, like Nero, like other games that don't have official power structures within the meta and the fiction of the game, are prone to, abuse more frequently. If you want to talk about that more, because I haven't talked about it yet.
Okay. Last year, in April of 2016.
Last year.
Yes, April of 2017, Doomsday ended its first 5-year plot arc. Okay? It was in the spring of 2017. Doomsday ended its first major plot arc, and when we rolled back out 3 months later, we implemented structures of power that existed on a meta level and belonged entirely to neutral NPC factions. They can't be influenced by in-game influence systems. They are entirely autonomous and intended to enforce the society structure of the game. We did this by implementing a Intergalactic Faith Accord, which is a faith-based organization, metaphysics, faith, the occult, esoterica. We have the military, we have the underworld, which is for your shady friends. You have the Tempest Foundation for Higher Learning, which is for science and academia. And then, did I get all of them? Politics. The political body, the people who are making decisions that affect the game world on a sweeping level, but without making other people not have fun. We integrated these into the game, and when your new PC enters game, they are literally onboarded like an episode of fucking Babylon 5. They're introduced into game. They are like, hey, I am a doctor. I want to do science, and we're like, cool. We're going to introduce you to the face NPC from the Tempest Foundation. Players are immediately empowered to interact with their face NPC for their division as well as other PCs in their group. But the thing is, no one PC in the Tempest Foundation can shit influence all over that face NPC to make sure that plot comes to them first. Nobody can leverage mechanics to take opportunities away from any one group of players because the system literally doesn't allow for that. And without having the ability of players to manipulate systems, and it sounds like a trust issue, but I promise it's not. But if they can't manipulate game systems to take opportunities away from other players, everyone gets along and has more fun because everyone has an equal playing ground to access the game and the plot and to grow in real time, both mechanically and as their own character. It is the single greatest change I think we made to the game in that time gap because, like, you might be competing with your friends to see who can be better at, I don't know, making a gun. Cool, but you can't compete with your friends to be like, I got all of the face NPCs to give me all of the plot. Like, it's just not an opportunity there. And so you see competition in healthy ways as opposed to ways that hurt you on a meta level. Awesome.
We're going to open up for formal questions in a second. I have a couple left for the panel. Did anybody else want to field that one, though, about structures, hierarchies, or just a general question about how rules, this came up in our email exchanges, about how rules can actually hurt player communities sometimes or be the cause of strife? So you kind of flipped it around and you said we can take problems that occur in rules and try to mitigate that by changing the system.
I mean, for us it's really easy because I wrote them so I can change them. And, but yeah, I like for Alliance it is an entire I mean for Alliance in a lot of older games where you have this really kind of structured. It is difficult. It's way more difficult because you have to get that past 30 years of game existence.
The high council.
And
the central committee out in I like going to big state communism where you're just waiting for when people are getting in Moscow, and you're waiting for your supplies to come, and you're like, come on, we need to change this mechanic. 4 years later, they haven't made the decision yet, and I don't know.
They've been working on this at 2.0 for 5 years.
Yeah, okay.
It's crazy. It's not what we asked for.
These are turnips!
Yes, oh my god. But, it's something that definitely beyond what we've heard, they use very specific Northwest aggregate maps. I talked about in my talk on the campus leader, something we did to kind of play around with some of the ideas that we touched upon. For example, rule systems that a player might not necessarily want. How do you set up a game that's more like Ruby on rules than programming in C? A game where you give people I see someone gets it, yes. You have a rule system that is 12 pages long and teaches people how to make their own rules. So I might come into the game and say, okay, cool, here are the 7 complete bare bone sets of rules that you can make, that you can create your own rules in. One of them is the Boffer type of rule, one of them is the Merritt type of rule, one of them is the metagame rule. There's an min-maxer function where your character could ask someone an abdicating question and they have to tell you the truth. There was a nomic-based rule set where you could sort of restructure sets of games. But each nation had their own way of building rules that was allowed, and then it was just sort of open up to everyone. And part of our pre-game set workshops was having folks come and try out their characters and start thinking okay, what are my rules to be? My character's a magician. I want rules where I get to throw a beanbag and turn people into bunnies. And it's just someone would come up with their rules and there'd be mechanics that made it really easy to just orient new players to what my character's special rules are that they've created, and then you kind of go out in the game and have this set of rules really fits what you want to do with that character. We also removed permanent death and had a system where you just become more and more an NPC each time you're resurrected, and so you have less power within the sort of competitive nature thing. So there were ways to let there be a level of game competition, but also let people totally go very deep down the role play rabbit hole and have role playing spaces have rules that they create that staff moderate. So each time someone wants it to be in the rule, they have to run it by us. We have to make sure that those things fit. You know, I really credit, you know, Brian Gregory and Paul Warwick for, you know, Brian Gregory, he's been on the PNI's rules committee for a very long time, 2 decades at this point. And so this was sort of a brainchild of looking at, like, all right, how could we do some of the cool things that are happening with the internet and, like, you know, make more aggregate rule structures that do these types of things, that have the small map, that let people feel invested in the rules that characters have all the time, let them feel important, and having a nation structure, you know, having like 8 or 7 nations where the moment you start playing, you're integrated into that nation, rather than like, here's a fishbowl, go survive, you know?
Yes. Like that's one thing that we like the religion system that we made very much where like we made it, because like a lot of times when we play games, like, oh, you start out as a new player, you come in, maybe you get a really good introductory mod, but then once you get that introductory mod, you might have some block the weekend, you're just kind of thrust into the world after that. The division system allowed us to really kind of like, oh, we're going to be here, you have a place where you can belong like at once. Like you immediately walk into the thing, you have agency as a player, which is really important. And it helps, like, you know, it helps really kind of foster that, like, play style that you want and the community you want to build, because it makes it a cooperative, like, effort as opposed to sort of, like, an individual coming in as an adventurer. Because, like a game, like, that concept doesn't really work. Like, ultimately, it's just, like, you can have, at a tabletop game, be a party of 5 adventurers. But if you're talking about a game that has, like, you know, 50+ people at it, like, not everyone can be the adventurer. It just doesn't work. Like, it doesn't, like, you can all go off on an adventure together, but, like, not all of you are going to get the screen time that, like, 5 people at a table will. And I feel like that, like, our early games never really kind of scaled up from that. Like, they kind of like, were like, oh, we're just going to translate D&D to us. And we've been kind of iterating beyond that. And, like, it's not something we even realized kind of when we first started, where it's just, like, you just kind of had to, like, almost like reverse engineer the entire system to find out, like, because you have all these, like, preconceived notions if you've been playing a game for a while as to what a LARP is and how things should work. And you kind of need to unlearn a lot of that stuff in order to, like, really move forward and change the art form and change things for the better. Like, I just created a 2-page document for another game, because I was like, after running a game with a large rule system, I was like, I will never do this again. Like, I like our rule system, but I will never do that again. Like, so, yeah, that is one thing I will say is, like, and another, like, a side point to, like, regarding, like, death and everything, like, one of the things we did, even mechanically at the beginning, was, like, that I've seen, like, community completely implode over, like, player versus player content, and so we created a really forgiving death system. Like, death effectively, like, vaguely doesn't matter in our world, but you can sometimes get cool stuff out of it. So that, like, that killing someone is not usually the best method for resolving your conflicts. But it also, if that turns out to be a thing that happens, it isn't so devastating that I'm like, well, I need to look at retiring my character now because I have 1 life left.
It also encourages really spicy choices when death can be cool, or when death isn't looming, like, directly over your head like a fucking comet the whole time. And, like, if you want to encourage competitive play, I think having very ominous permanent death systems is a good way to do it, because people will play things really close to the chest. I don't really know how to do that in a constructive way yet, but I also haven't looked into it, so I don't know. I'll come back to that later. But a very forgiving death system has made it so that, like, we'll be like, you're going off-world for this mission. If you die, you're going to lose tether, which is, like, our live system. And people are like, yeah, that's fine. I want to do the really spicy thing and, like, dig into the heart of the planet and face the giant what the fuck ever that lives there, because, like, it's not the end of the world, and I'm gonna have more chances to do more cool things. And so, like, play is still competitive, but it's constructively so, because people want to make really interesting and compelling choices, because maybe I'm gonna learn how to talk to a god when I die, or maybe I just kind of become a little bit more like a bug. It's fine. Like, it makes people do fun things when they don't feel like it's the end of the goddamn world if they die.
One other big thing that we've kind of done in this thing, like, regarding, like, death and retirement specifically, is that we've really developed a very good kind of way of handling and making sure that like one of the biggest problems that a community will have is characters that get entrenched and basically live and exist within this like pocket forever, where this is the one person you would go to for all these things, because why would you go to anyone else, because that's the most powerful person. And we've like I think like of anyone, like we just retired out probably the oldest character in the game last event, who had been playing that character for 4 years. So like as someone that played one character at a LARP for 10 years, that wasn't good for the game. Like, I recognize that, like, maybe, like, I have those, like, excuses in my head. I was like, well, I was good with my power. I shared it to other people. It's like, no, my existence isn't good for that play. It isn't like, it doesn't give space to other people. Like, it just, like, yeah, like, I might be encouraging people, or I might think I'm one of the good people. Everyone does. Like, everyone thinks they're not the person that's, like, destroying that space by existing. And so, like, for, that is one of the things I think that is really important for, like, having a really functional, like, long-term community, and is, like, to encourage character turnover. Because, like, those, like, that old guard needs to go away. Because they represent a past that, like, is another generation now in a lot of cases. Where just, like, another generation of thought, another generation of, like, of way that this works. Like, they come from, it's just, like, it's like, oh, yeah, because, I mean, realistically, a lot of times it's like, these people are playing a different game than I am. And, like, you shouldn't have multiple games running at the same LARP.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to piggyback on that, just with the quick mechanic. It's like, having character turnover, I think is one way to address it. Something that was experimented with Debbie and Beyond the Ether that I really liked was, having a win situation. And it's funny how people talk about how, American LARPers play to win, it's awful, and it's like, no, we don't. No one ever wins these games. You're just trying to keep your status in the same place forever. You're just like, oh, whoa, like I'm trying to stay alive, and it's not a win situation. So what if you set up a situation where, maybe it's sort of board game-as, people are competing for resources or something, where there's a win stake, and at the end of 2 years or however many years, 1 year or 2 years, we're tops for these games. You declare a nation the winner and it's over. And it was interesting because with Beyond the Ether, I think one thing that kind of divided the staff was the fact that as the play continued, the players were less and less interested in the win scenario than we thought they'd be, because it was like, all right, we're finally giving Boffer Larpers the chance to win something. They ended up basically petitioning the Fae of the game, or whatever the guardians of it, to turn the game world into a PvE game world. And we were just like, wait a second, like the point was to make y'all entertain each other with this subtle competition.
Winning is another good way to do it, though.
But at least ending the game, whether or not it's through a win,
Yeah, or like allowing just individual groups of characters to finally win, and like maybe sometimes you just need to walk off into the sunset with your happy fucking ending. Like letting players actually do that sometimes encourages them. Like the circumstances which spawned it weren't great, but like I had a character that I played for 4 years at Alliance who finally got the option to like accomplish her goal and sort of walk off into the sunset and never be seen again because she was hanging out with her cannibal family. And it was like, I don't need to play this character ever again. Like, she literally got what she wanted, and like, that's another good way to do it. And rewinding slightly about like character turnover in general, I think part of what needs to be done to make that more compelling is you have to make it accessible on an out-of-game level. An example of what I mean is at like Alliance or a lot of like very high costuming games, character turnover is fucking terrifying because I just spent $500 on this leather armor and now I can't. No, like if you make your costume requirements and like a lot of your out-of-game requirements for the game a little more forgiving, you will also see, in my experience, people more willing to let their characters die because building a new character isn't going to cost them all of their arms and legs. It's also a little bit of like an income issue too. Like not everyone can afford to do that thing. So that's something worth considering when you're building out your game is like, do I want to necessitate you having to buy like a 1300s kit every time you make a new character? Don't do that. Don't do that. It's not nice.
So let's open up to questions now. I know that we had one hand up earlier. Would you like to go for it? Yeah.
I was curious, you talked about transitioning to meta power structures. I'm not familiar with your game, this is the first time I've heard of it. I'm sorry. It's amazing, by the way. But I'm curious, do you have meta power structures that are, I guess, is it PvE or PvP? Like, you were trying to focus on the PvE. Is there any problem with that kind of meta power structure being opposed to your player base? Like being the competition for them? Because if they can't influence that opposing force, that can turn into possibly reinforcing things that the players can't resist?
With one exception, it's not been a problem, but there is one thing that we've been kind of like, we've been running into recently, but like, we'll talk about that in a second, but like, or I'll allow you to probably talk about, I mean, if you'd like to talk about it.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, the power structures I was talking about are all, they represent the government, like the governing structure of the game. Mm-hmm. So those are all collaborative amongst all of the different PCs, different like specialties. In terms of PvE structures, we do have like, we have a neutral structure that was supposed to be like the governing body of the underworld, because we thought it was really important to enable a faction for the people who want to do underhanded things, or who want to be mercenaries, or who don't necessarily want to work for the greater good of the government. Because sometimes you don't want to work for the man, and most people don't ever want to do that. So we had implemented a neutral structure called the Fishers, who were intended to be like, they were like the third-party contractors who were just like the human bulletin boards, who were like, there's a bounty, it's and we actually have seen players like really chafing against that organization, and we're talking about that actively because that's not an organization you can influence, because they're just the third-party like power brokers, for lack of a better word. So it's not a thing we anticipated having to deal with.
Yeah, like they're rebelling against something that isn't really rebellable against. Like there isn't like something that's just like it's like well, there's this community group that we're all part of, and we hate it. So we want to.
Let's find a way to make it rebellable against outside of the constraints of an influence system. Maybe they have like a cool face heel turn. Like honestly, the way we're kind of looking at it is if PCs want to try and take down like Blackwater, let's find a way to make it happen. Yeah. And implement something new that like maybe an NPC like a PC retires and steps up into that role, so that like you give them an opportunity to do something cool and replace the structure that PCs just kind of unanimously don't like. Let people do cool things.
I just want to ask a quick clarifying question. So in terms of, it sounds like there is a level of institutional PvP where like different institutions might have conflicting goals.
Not exactly. That's not. It's really kind of like one government. So like just to be clear, like we run a sci-fi game. Like I think that wasn't really explicit.
Yes,
outside. So like
it's very like Babylon 5, Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, we run a far future sci-fi game. So basically, all the organizational structures all exist under the government. So they're not necessarily antagonistic towards one another. So they're not really set up in a way that they're intended to be antagonistic towards one another. They're literally just like, hey, this is the place where like, hey, I'm playing a science person. I'm going to be part of like science team, and therefore that's where like if you want like primarily science content, like we want to do some cool like Frisco over there did a cool archaeology thing where we had to like literally dig in we had people literally dig in the dirt for a tablet to find.
And it's interesting because like some design choices we made in the Pacific Northwest, we thought you had to be PvP institutionally to have structured institutions, and it sounds like it's more PvE-esque what you're doing.
Yeah.
But you know, there's like a level that game staff is like moderating what's happening in each of these you know, groups. Like we would have called them houses in alliance or something, you know, like the different fractions. Do you have a level of like like individualist PvP where you might write into a player's backstory?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, like we empower, I don't know how to describe it really well, but like we don't encourage PvP, but like if, like, I'm trying to think of a good example. I don't have one, so fuck it. But like if two players really want to have an antagonistic relationship, we're not going to stop them as long as like they like pre-negotiate comfort levels and like talk about potential outcomes of that situation. Like we also really...
Red and Hazari.
Huh?
Red and Hazari.
Oh yeah, well we did have two PCs who were fighting to be the alpha of Space Wolf Pack. And they pre-negotiated their physical violence, and then they did physical violence at each other. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. But like, we don't institutionalize the PvP, but we also don't ever condemn people for wanting to pursue that type of roleplay, because that's not cool.
Yeah, the only vague exception to that is the underworld, just so because it is kind of inherently antagonistic, but so it's not part of the government. But even that, like, it's really mild as to what that is. Just like, hey, like, I think the worst thing we've had is like, go set up some bugs over here, and some people got poisoned. That happened too.
It's just funny because, like, you know, when I hear like PvP versus PvE, you know, it's there's some, you know, discussion occasionally where people are just like adamant, like one way will build a better community or another, and you know, like I think it, like having the mindset that that there's something, you know, outside of the structure of how plot is delivered.
One quick thing I'm just going to add into like the entire thing. If you're going to allow PvP as part of the thing, don't allow cabin raiding. Don't allow people to be killed in the middle of the night when they're escaping out of the game, because that is the thing that will kill PvP the most. If you can like basically knock someone out when they're dead, because that's the most reasonable thing to do. Like if you need to go kill someone, go kill them in their sleep. And like every bad PvP thing I've ever seen in a game has because someone was cabin raided. Like let that stuff always be up front and in the daylight, or at the very least just like so. Like also, I like to sleep, and like I like my community to have been well rested. I like everyone to be in a good mood in the morning. And so like, you know, there is a period of time where like, you know, like yes, you could theoretically like, you can't cabin raid basically, but like you could attack someone in their room like during the broad daylight, but like between these hours, there's no, that just doesn't exist.
Well, it's also an inclusion issue. There's so many ways that could be more triggering for some people.
Some
or
people
just
get
ability
sick.
issues. Yeah.
Like it's literally a safety issue for a lot of people.
It's also a hierarchy of needs issue. Like people fucking sleep.
Okay, so we had one in the back there, blue shirt, and then blue shirt. Yeah, great.
So I actually wanted to see if y'all could talk a little more about what you do in terms of NPC training, specifically around emotional connection with players and emotional well-being. I know that, at least in my case, with what I'm trying to set up, a lot of the cast folks that I'm bringing in are people who don't have teaching experience per se or counselor experience, but they do have theater experience or LARP experience. So in designing training for them, mechanics, yeah, that's one thing, but being able to get across the idea that their goal was to maximize the experience of the players and to lose in the most entertaining way possible, generally speaking. In terms, I'm curious what techniques you use to get that across, what particular activities and whatnot you do in training in order to make that connection come across well.
It seems like you did a lot of that. Do you want to start?
Yeah, and you know, so the funny experience helping run Alliance Monster Camp, you know, is we'd have like waves of crunchies we'd send out, like we were just like, you know, like, just go, entertain them, you know, like for hours and hours and hours, and you know, there wasn't much structure sometimes to the things we did. So we really wanted the NPCs to have the ability to think on their feet and act with a level of autonomy, and something that we really focus on with new NPCs throughout the entire weekend. You know, we had sort of mentors, you know, like kind of a buddy system where, you know, like I would sometimes be like, all right, you know, I'll be on those two, like our monster mistress, you know, who, you know, we always seem to have a theater person who had a lot of theater experience as a monster mistress. It was like a rotating role, but like Anna, the monster mistress at the time I was doing it, you know, like, you know, she'd sort of like, you know, bring the theatrical training into it for folks who seem to be lacking in the theater realm, you know, and you can kind of gauge, like when you meet someone, it's like, all right, you know, are you ready to, you know, do this kind of thing or that kind of thing, and you kind of figure out who needs what kind of mentoring a little more, and you know, make sure they're interacting with everyone, but workshopping throughout the weekend, workshopping safety mechanics. You really want to do that for, I think, at least an hour. And when I say safety mechanics, like I'm not talking about emotional calibration necessarily, but like just not hitting people in the face. You know, this is a Boffer Larp we're talking about, and like having like really modeling like having people ready to model the behaviors that you want from them, and then having that person, it's almost like when you train people for canvassing, like door-to-door canvassing, you always have like that like mentor canvasser out there with them on their first couple days. Like you want to have the person who's mentoring them going out with them on mods and like, sort of leading and like stepping back more and more until they got it. That was sort of our approach.
A lot of what we do, a lot of, if there's like a coffee, yes, I've been erudite and eloquent. A lot of it is letting your people, like actually sitting down and briefing your NPCs and explaining like roleplay cues, even if it's for like a fucking dog, like how does a dog act? Like how can a dog be poignant? Well, dogs are loyal and they love the person that is their owner, unless they don't because they've been beaten. Like giving roleplay cues, even for the simplest of roles, and giving and empowering the NPCs once they have that information to make creative choices that engage players, and letting them know like they're not going to get in trouble for that. Like a really good example, a rule that we have in NPC camp is take the fucking shiv, which is just one example, which is like if someone uses a cool skill on you, die loudly and fun. Like make that skill and using it, make that PC who worked hard to get that skill feel amazing. But on the other end of that is like, if someone is sitting down with this NPC and maybe it's like, I'm trying to think of a good actual example we've had, but again, I can't. But if an NPC is out there who, an example of what might happen in our game is maybe they're a religious zealot from a faction that is really scary to the PCs, because we do have some like religious factions that are very scary to PCs. But if they're out there and you've told that NPC, like, be a person, be a human person or a robot person or whatever who has had experiences and like is relatable. And if a PC is listening to this and is like, oh, I'm starting to kind of come around to this faith, can you teach me more? Yes, let's build that relationship. Say yes, be their mentor. I will let you come back as that NPC as many goddamn times as they want so that you can have a fulfilling experience on both sides of the fence, because NPCing should be fun. Like, if it's not fun, that's a problem with your game. So empowering your NPCs to have just as much fun as PCs is vital. And also, like, I saw it a lot in Alliance when I played Alliance. And I'm sorry, I'm trying super hard not to sound like I'm shitting on a system, because Alliance is literally where I got my start and was some of the best years of my fucking life. But there was a very antagonistic relationship between PCs and NPCs in that culture. And like, for games to be fun and make everyone feel wanted and valuable as part of a community, they have to know that playing a dog is just as much fun as playing a paladin. Like, that's really important.
Yeah, and like it's really, I mean, I just want to reiterate this. Like the most important thing for NPCs is you're there for the players, not there. Like you're there to have a good time, but you're there to make other people feel awesome. Like I was at a game one time that I kind of walked out of because of this a little bit and other things. But they had like literally a scoreboard in logistics for how many like players they killed that event. And I was like, I'm
gonna chime in real quick. Also, we have a similar system in the game I play in, but it's more you get candy if you make the players cry.
That's awesome.
we actually have something written into one of the rules, into one of the things.
But if you make the characters cry, I should say.
If they're having fun and crying.
Yes, if it's good character immersive crying.
We actually have we have an influence system in our game where you can earn influence and spend it on NPCs to cause things to happen, and like literally written into there regarding food stuff is just generally the care of plot marshals, where like you might get better results if you give the plot marshals food also.
Because we do forget to eat.
Yeah.
And I'll also chime in, I think as an intergroups relations researcher, mixing it up is important. So we logistically had to have PCs do NPC shifts in order to have enough just bodies, but there's such a just accidental beauty in that, because then you get and people who are doing day-long NPCing mixing it up with the PCs, and they actually interact. And these are people
out of game time, so important.
It's super important.
We have it as mandatory because I think that, like, I mean, having gone and tried both systems, I think mandatory NPCing for everyone makes it so that everyone feels like they're all in the same boat. You're all doing the same thing. You all have to take you all have to go out there with some weapons and like take a few hits sometimes. Like if you're all like, and that it also really kind of indicates that it's a community. It isn't just the NPCs versus the PCs, because these two people are on different sides and never the twain shall meet. Also, I don't know how, there's times where we actually have a fairly strong NPC cabinet now, but there's times where you just, I don't know how a game runs a lot of times without, and I'm like, wow, we have 5 people, and they're doing everything this entire event.
It's vital.
You know, something too that I forgot to mention that I think is really huge is NPC debrief and de-rolling with them. You know, just when someone gets back from a mod, how did it go? How did it feel to you? You know, the NPCs are humans in that experience too. It doesn't matter that they're not customers. You know, less or if they are, you know, depending on what your game's structure is, you know. But taking a moment to just listen to whatever their stories and not shaming them if they felt a certain way about how the interaction went, and you know, being ready where it's whoa, I went out as a townsperson character, but I'm feeling antsy and I wasn't able to engage because I kind of wanted to be you know, doing a combat role, and it's great, go out as a spider, we've got a mob coming up, and kind of helping calibrate to their energy and their energy level by you know, just having your monster mistress or whoever being how did it go, you know, and just having that moment, and it really helps you know, push them into the spot where they're going to be the most happy, which is going to make them the most effective. And then, yes, double hooking, having, you know, each PC have to take an hour shift or something as an NPC is great. But then also, the after the game debrief, which for, you know, our chapter tended to happen at Denny's over, you know, hamburgers or something, but going somewhere with the PCs and PCs and then talking about what happened in the game totally out of character and kind of modeling that behavior and saying, oh my gosh, my character really hated you, or oh, when I was playing that townsperson, it was so scary when you're, you know, it was always interesting listening to the stories from NPCs where a new NPC, you know, might have been terrified by the PC who ran up and swings for 17 and was just you know, dragon's breath, you know, and then you know, they're sitting eating a hamburger and they're oh, cool, okay, you're a human, we're okay now, you know, and it I think helped build a better culture of NPCs who wanted to entertain these people.
I absolutely agree. We do usually once or twice a year we'll do a half event, half party, simply because I think it's really, I mean, we do go as E2, but I think it's important, especially since we have a third of our player base is driving 4 or 5 hours to get to events. So I think it's really important for all of us to get together and kind of see one another in a different context and just be able to be hang out as people sometimes, because you know, there are a lot of awesome people that are around, and I was just and it's just oh, I don't get to spend time with you because there's no way I'm making that drive.
It also builds out-of-game trust to do riskier things in-game, which if your community doesn't have that trust, those things could just backfire fantastically, especially in PvP situations. But if I have got to hang out with you out of game multiple times, and I trust you, and I have a relationship with you where I can be my character thinks your character is the literal worst, I would be kind of interested in pursuing this kind of plotline, and being able to have a trusting, transparent, understanding conversation with people is going to make my game spicier, and spicy choices are very delicious, both for game runners and for other players, as bystanders, as writers. If you get the opportunities to meet the people you're playing with eye to eye and face to face and cheek to whatever, and really get to engage and learn about each other out of game, you're gonna have more fun in game when you come back together next month and fucking duke it out on a bridge at sunset. Fucking do it. Be friends with your people.
I think that's a lovely note to end on.